Hi, Jeremy Crow here. Welcome to Esoteric Ask Me Anything Session 2. So I did this once before. Actually, I've done a bunch of unstructured live streams that are just centered around esotericism, whatever you want to talk about. But this one is the second time I've branded it as that. So there you go. Naming makes a difference. I think that naming things is a very powerful act. It's a magical act, really. They say to name something. If you don't name something, it has a different energy to it, in a sense, you could say, than something that is named. Now, I actually have an example of this where there was a small, tight-knit group of friends that I had. Hey, Derek, welcome to the live stream. Glad you could make it. So yeah, I had this small group of close-knit friends, and we were all into the occult and ceremonial magic and various forms of esoteric practice and study. And like I said, there was 4 of us, and we would regularly get together and do different projects, essentially, you could say. We did different experiments, you could say. We would decide on a type of working that we wanted to perform, and then we would brainstorm how we were going to go about doing it, actually doing it, and then we would do it. And then we would talk about the results afterwards as well. It was kind of like our own little esoteric research and development crew. Miss B says hi. Hi, Miss B. I'm glad you could stop in. Oliver says hello, Jeremy. Nice to see you on stream once again. Thanks for popping by, Oliver, and for leaving a comment there in the live chat. Yeah, so I was saying the power or the magic of naming something. It's interesting. It changes things, and not always for the better. And this is the example that I was going to bring up, actually, is this tight-knit group of friends that I was part of. There was 4 of us, and we would just decide. Like, I remember one time we had decided that we were going to do a working to invoke Mars, the planet Mars, or the intelligence of Mars, you could say. And the reason that we came up with that idea in the first place was because of the astronomical event of Mars being exceptionally close to Earth, physically, in the physical world. And it was something like the last time Mars was going to be that close to Earth in the next like 30 years or something like that. I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember that Mars, the planet, was exceptionally close to Earth. And so we were like, let's capitalize on that and let's invoke Mars in some form or another. And we came up with our own unique esoteric group ritual that would do such a thing. And we took inspiration from several disciplines. It was a very eclectic ritual, but it was very well put together, in my opinion. We had like some swords that we had placed on the ritual chamber floor in a specific pattern. We had specific tarot cards laid out in the temple, in the working space, in specific locations. We had choreographed this I believe it was like a dance, in a sense, an ecstatic dance. And there's a few other elements. I'm not going to get into the full details of it, but we did, put in the work, and we crafted this ceremony, and we performed it. And some of the results were quite profound. Some of the people said, I don't know if I want to invoke Mars for a while now because of all the um, the chaotic results that they had in their life that they had attributed to it. Personally, Mars is something that I find very close to me in terms of like a resonance. That I feel very resonant with the energies of Mars. I'm not a soldier or anything, but I do feel a very strong not affiliation, affinity, a very strong affinity to Mars, and in particular the tarot card that represents Mars, which would be the Tower. If you're not aware, 7 of the major arcana cards are planets. 3 of them are elements, and 12 of them are zodiac signs. So that's how you get 22. 3 elements, 7 planets, and 12 signs of the zodiac make up the 22 major arcana of the tarot. And the one that represents Mars, planetary Mars, is the Tower. I actually have a large representation of the Tower, one version of it, in a sense, a Sumerian version of it, a ziggurat, a Sumerian Mesopotamian stepped pyramid, seven levels above ground. And I have that as a large back piece tattooed on my back, partly because of my affinity for the Tower card. But anyways, we didn't have a name for this group, this ritual group that we had together. And one day we ended up deciding to name it. And we came up with a name for it that was like a 4-letter word that actually, if you pronounced it out, was another word. But I'm not going to tell you what the name of it was because that's very private to me. But I do find it very interesting that once we named the group, that it very shortly fell apart. So something changed, and I feel like the naming of it had something to do with that. I feel on a very deep level, on a very deep intuitive level, that naming it did have some kind of effect, some kind of magical effect, in a sense you could say, that changed things a little bit. And it ended up causing enough disruption, or whatever word you want to use, that it ended up causing the downfall of that group, in a sense, that we didn't get together and have these productive exercises or experiments anymore. But yeah, it was, I think fondly upon that time. That was, we had some really great magical workings. And yeah, that still sticks with me to this day. But yeah, I feel like naming something is a very powerful thing. And it's not to be trifled with, you know? And I take naming things very seriously. I feel like words have meaning. And I feel like the words that we use to communicate things with one another, with ourselves, impacts us even on a level that we're not consciously aware of. So I think it's very important that we are very careful in the way that we use words. To give you another example of this, I feel like, there's a classic example from folklore where you have the genie or the leprechaun or something that grants wishes, and you have to be extremely careful about the way you word it, because the entity or the force that grants the wish might decide to interpret the words you use very literally, and it could grant your wish in a technical sense, but it's not the spirit behind what you wanted. It's not what you wanted, but it's what you said, It's what you wished for. It's the words you used to wish for something, and you got what you asked for, but it wasn't what you wanted because you were not careful in wording it. And okay, so Derek says, I was just speaking about naming, and this may not be exactly the same context, but my sister didn't give her son a middle name because they feel it's irrelevant. What's your thoughts on this? Well, I know your sister, so I gotta be careful about what I say here. No, yeah, it's an odd choice, I think. I do think that that's an odd choice. I don't think it's irrelevant. I think that somebody's middle name, like, do you feel like your middle name is irrelevant? I know you're named Derek. I know that you were named after your father, that your middle name is your father's name, your father's first name. And same in my case, my middle name is my father's first name. And it does make me think about how my father's personality and my father's genetic makeup even has influenced who I am as an individual. And I feel like he has contributed a massive amount to who I am today. I am my own person, but in some sense, I am an extension of my father as well. So to have his name in my name reminds me of that as well. And it reminds me that I am my own person, but that I do have that I do have a lot in me from my father as well. But it doesn't have to be your father that, that your middle name is. I think that it has it does give you something. And I think that sometimes when people are going through adolescence and early adulthood, a lot of times, sometimes people will end up going by their middle name for a period of time, maybe even for the rest of their lives. They end up adopting their middle name as their name, as their preferred label, or whatever you want to call it. Not label, but what they prefer people to call them when they're saying the person's name, and it's a way that they can kind of reclaim their own identity in a sense, where they can say, you know what, I'm choosing this as my identity. And also, I think that sometimes giving somebody a powerful middle name also gives them a way to have something that inspires them. Say, oh, well, I'm named after this, historical figure, and that gives me that's a source of inspiration for me, and it ends up coloring the way that they end up living their lives. And I do think that it's important. And to not have a middle name, there's a void there. It's pretty standard in our culture here in Canada, North America. A moniker. Derek says it gives, I feel it gives us an identity. Yeah, I really do think that your name does give you an identity. And, you have some level of control over that, in a sense where you can choose, like, how people shorten your name. Like, people who are very close to me, or very familiar, people who have that level of familiarity with me, feel free to call me Jer, and instead of Jeremy, right? And that is something that I have control over. I can be like, no, I prefer Jeremy, or something like that, right? And people do that, and people, like I said, sometimes people will take their middle name as their identifier, that they want to be identified by their middle name. And that's something that gives them that freedom to be able to choose a little bit. It gives them a little wiggle room, right? To have a middle name in the first place. To not have that middle name eliminates that option. Of course, you can pick a name that's completely not anything at all that related to your given names. But But I do feel like that does give you something. It does give you something to have a name, especially even a middle name, especially in a culture where almost everybody has a middle name, you know. And people are going to be asking, they're going to say, well, what's your middle name? Like, that'll come up here and there, you know, and they'll be like, I don't have one. And people will be like, what? You don't have one? Your parents didn't give you a middle name, you know? It's almost like you weren't given that, you know. It's like you're kind of like missing out a little bit, you know. It's not a huge deal, but I do feel like I would, you know, feel like I would prefer to have a middle name than not to have one. And let's see, what do we have here? Some other comments here. Oliver says, I'd like to ask about your experience with path working with deities, since you mentioned doing ritual work with Mars. Okay. William says moniker. Yeah, moniker. That's a word. One of the words that would have worked when I was searching for a word. Thank you, William. Okay, so you were asking about path working with deities. Well, path working is a more specific term for scrying the tree of life from the Hermetic Kabbalah. Usually is what people are referring to when they say path working. They're talking about scrying the astral plane using the tree of life from the Hermetic Kabbalah as the roadmap. I have never done that. I've never done that. What I have done, well, I have done some things that were kind of similar, and did actually take the tree of life into account with that working. That you could say that in a sense, but it wasn't in the way that people talk about path working in that sense. But what I have done is I've done scrying on the astral plane, and I have encountered entities, and but more particularly demonic entities, not as much deities in that sense. Although, you know, it's you know, arguable that maybe those are a form of deities. That a lot of demons, a lot of demonic, what people refer to as demonic entities, actually were kind of like other cultures' deities, the deities from other cultures that were demonized by, you know, either a conquering force or, you know, not necessarily in the sense of physical war, but in the sense of maybe a cultural dominance. In particular, Christianity taking a lot of deities like Asherah, the old pagan goddess that was, you know, the wife of Yahweh. And then instead of acknowledging that as part of their pantheon, they decided to turn her into a demon, and a male demon at that. But it ends up being one of the most powerful demons that we talk about, which is Astaroth. You know, it's you know, most people have heard of that demon, you know. So that's kind of interesting. That's kind of a talk about a woman hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Okay, Oliver says, sorry, poor choice of words from my part. I don't know. I plan on making my first contact with Lucifer on my birthday, which is in May, and I wanted to ask if you've worked with any similar deities or symbols. Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, I've interacted with a lot. You know, I don't even know where to start, really, but yeah, I've done a lot of work on the astral plane, and a lot of that involved interacting with entities of various types. Some of them were very light bearer ish. I don't know if that had that kind of light bearer archetype to them. Um, I think that maybe one of the pieces of advice that I can give you is try not to have expectation. Try to what's the way that Crowley puts it? I think he has a phrase that he likes to use, or that he used and that ended up becoming very popular. What was it? Something like devoid of the lust of results, I think is what he ended up saying. So don't is in every way pure, something like I can't remember. I was a Thelemite so long ago, but he has this line, and it's something along the lines of the pure will with the free of the lust of results is in every way pure. I can't remember exactly, but I found in practice that the most accurate communications you're going to have with these entities are when you are able to relax your mind to the point where you do not have any conscious expectation about how they're going to respond to your interactions. So if you ask them a question, try not to hold in your mind what you expect the answer to be, because they could just parrot that off to you, right? You have to be able to develop the mental discipline to not hold a conscious expectation for what they will say. And that's the best advice I can give you when you are doing scrying on the astral plane and interacting with entities on that level. You're going to get the most accurate results, or the most accurate responses, or the most, I'm not going to say accurate, but probably the least tainted responses, and often the most beautiful. Like, it's like you wouldn't believe the lyrical genius of some of these entities. It's just awe-inspiring, some of the things that they'll say. And it can take weeks, months, even years sometimes to unpack some of the things that you hear these entities, certain entities in particular, what they've said to you when you've interacted with them on the astral plane. So that would be my best advice for you if you're going to do that. Start practicing mental discipline now. In particular, the ability to just kind of the type of meditation where you don't let your mind wander. You don't let your mind speculate on whatever it is your locus of, your whatever you're focusing on. Like, it could be your breath, it could just be an empty space about like 3 feet in front of you in the air. It could be an image, it could be a rock, whatever your focus is. Just be aware that it exists, and just be present with it, whether that be your breath or anything else. And if you find your mind wandering or contemplating it, like coming up with things that you think about it, or any of that, like or something completely off topic, whether it's on topic or not on topic, you should just bring your focus back to just being aware of it and not thinking about it. And that's a form of mental discipline that'll come in very handy when you're scrying the astral plane, and interacting with entities. So hopefully that helps. Hail Satan says, Hi, great to see you. Hi, Hail Satan. Great to see you too. I'm glad that you could stop in. I really appreciate all of you guys being here. Bewitching Charm says, moon emoji. Hi, Jeremy. Hi. Thanks for being here. Not that long ago, I saw a crescent moon with Venus very, very close in the sky, and it was just so striking and beautiful. It just was, very uplifting. Your moon emoji made me think of that bewitching charm. Oliver says, noted, thank you very much. Might sound cheesy though, but I felt drawn to Lucifer ever since I began my involvement with the occult. I began in the right-hand path, and well, Lucifer isn't their thing. Like, it almost feels as if he's calling to me or something. Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. I started out on the right-hand path as well, but I found myself making choices and justifying those choices in my mind at first. That would bring me closer to Lucifer. That I did feel that strong calling to Lucifer in particular, and I'm not talking about Satan. Although that is a very interesting and intriguing just gestalt, for lack of a better term. But Lucifer in particular, I felt a very strong calling to. And at first, I wouldn't even admit it to myself. I was very right-hand path at the beginning of my personal journey. But I did find myself taking steps ever closer. And eventually, something clicked, and I was like, yes. Like, I felt like a strong, strong resonance with the Luciferian archetype, and the word Lucifer in particular just kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It's beyond words, but I just felt that click, that coming into alignment, in a sense, with my own self-knowledge, really. And I dropped the pretense to myself and others about my interest in Lucifer, and I accepted, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for the whole time, if I'm really honest with myself. And I just embraced that, and it's been amazing ever since. So I fully understand. It's not cheesy at all to me. It's exactly what I felt too. It sounds like maybe you're a little bit more, or maybe you've hit that click point that I had as well. Yeah. And it was actually part of the catalyst for that was my involvement in esoteric Freemasonry and ceremonial initiation through group ritual up in the mountains of Colorado, way up in the middle of nowhere. So beautiful in this ancient temple. Well, not ancient, but very old historical building, protected national historical protected, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure the words that you use in the United States to describe that kind of thing, but it's a historical protected building, this ancient, I keep saying ancient, this historical building that was a temple, and it had been used for Freemasonry ever since it had been built. And it was such a beautiful temple. And yeah, that environment was very conducive to introspection, and a lot of esoteric kind of practices. It just was very conducive to that, and it was beautiful, and I loved it. And the people there were really cool too. I enjoyed hanging out with a lot of those people up in the mountains and on these retreats, these Masonic retreats, practicing an esoteric form of Freemasonry. In particular, it was about halfway between Denver and Colorado Springs, if I remember correctly. Larkspur, Colorado, is is the small town that the temple was in. Keenan says Colorado has some awesome mountains. Oh, I'm glad that you managed to pop in there, Keenan. Yeah, we should continue our private discussion. I got a lot in common there, and was enjoying that. My life has just been crazy busy lately, but I will continue to message you and stuff. Derek says, I never really thought about which path I take, but I know that people who follow the left-hand path don't particularly like to follow hierarchies. I've always had a hard time with authority. Yeah, well, that is true to some extent. There are a lot of lone wolves in the left-hand path community, probably more. Like a higher percentage, I mean, not necessarily more in raw numbers, but in terms of percentages, I think there's probably a lot more lone wolves in the left-hand path than followers, compared to the right-hand path. Right-hand path is kind of about following rules in a sense, right? And left-hand path is not. So when there are hierarchies in the left-hand path, those hierarchies often get toppled or overthrown in some way or taken over, and there's like power games sometimes that happen, which are very fun. They can be very fun, but they can also be very disruptive as well, and they can distract from the work itself. But yeah, there are hierarchies. Sorry, I'm kind of tripping over my words here. There are hierarchies within the left-hand path for sure, but I don't feel like they're the same. They're not engaged with in the same way as people on the right-hand path for sure. Oliver says, I feel the same. Even as a kid, before I got into religion at all, I really liked mythology and always associated myself with those light-bearing archetypes or those connected to knowledge. Like Athena, Greek goddess of knowledge and wisdom, and war. She was also the goddess of war too, not just wisdom. Thoth and Heka from the Egyptian mythology. Yeah, Prometheus, that's a classic. That's probably one of the most pure representations of the light bearer archetype that exists. You could maybe say Enki from the Mesopotamian, also known as Ea, later on in the Babylonian and beyond. Sometimes you could see Ea there. But yeah, there are some very interesting and intriguing light-bearing archetypes. Odin would be one. If he kind of hung from the tree and sacrificed his eye, in a sense. He gave up his eye and he brought back knowledge. The whole journey of the hero is very similar and has a lot of, like, one version of the journey of the hero as described by Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. One version of that hero's journey is the light bearer archetype. And it's not that hard to see. Dan the Knife Ferret. That's an interesting username. Asked me what my favorite movie is. Probably Dark City is one of my top favorite movies of all time, that's for sure. I almost said The Matrix. That's definitely way up there. I was thinking about The Matrix a lot today, actually, so it's interesting you're asking me about movies, because I was thinking about how, like, in the movies that you see, there is no real escape from the Matrix. The pills, like, they do all these elaborate rituals and they do all these, crazy, they do all this elaborate stuff, but they never really fully escape, do they? I mean, if you really look into it, on the surface, all the people in Zion, like even the people that never were in the Matrix are still in the Matrix. Like Tank and Dozer, when they proudly say that they don't have plugs on their, the back of their neck or down their spine or anywhere else in their arm and stuff. They proudly are like, oh yeah, no plugs, born free child of Zion, No, they're not. They're not free. They weren't born free. They were born into slavery just like everybody in the Matrix. Did you ever notice that the people who are plugged into the Matrix, that they don't realize that they're in there, they're plugged in, they're in those tubes with the plugs in them, in the pink amniotic fluid and those flute things. Do you ever notice that you've got this tower, right? A cylindrical tower, and you have all those pink, reddish kind of tubes coming off where all the people are living, right? In a sense, where they, in a physical sense, that's where their physical bodies is housed, in those pink receptacles that are on a tube, on a cylinder, and there's tons of them, right? Now, if you ever notice, if you look at Zion, the underground city, it's a tube, and every door where people are living, all the doors are red, and you have these machines, right, that are part of the city of Zion, the underground city of Zion, that old man on the council, one of the few old men on the council that they make a joke about, is talking with Neo down there when in the middle of the night or whatever. I guess I don't know if they know if it's night or not, but they couldn't sleep, and so they both are down there looking at these machines that recycle the air and things like that, and allow them to actually survive down there. Without it, they wouldn't survive. And they don't know how it works, or, they don't know how to do anything. They know how to break it if they wanted to, but that whole thing is built by the machines. That the machines built Zion as a place to put the people that got out of the Matrix. Now they're in a different holding area. It's a place to put all those anomalies, you could say, so that they don't infect the rest of the crops, And they even pretty much say that the architect even pretty much goes and says that. He says, okay, well, what you do is you go into that door and you disseminate your code so we can make another version of the Matrix that has less of an anomaly in it, and you can pick, what was it, 23 men and 23 women or something, I think, and that's like the number of chromosomes we have. But anyways, that's irrelevant at the moment, but you pick people and you rebuild Zion, and you become part of the deception. That's happened several times. Those the anomaly that comes to the source and disseminates the code, then they're like, okay, well, if we want to continue the human species, I'm going to need to do this and be part of the whole. It's revealed to them what the whole thing is all about, that they've been led into. They choose, all the previous ones before Neo had chosen to go along with it. They go into that the source, disseminate their code, they reboot the Matrix, and they restart Zion with those core people. And those core people that were chosen are fed a lie by the one, by their savior, their supposed savior lies to them and says, "Oh yeah, we're gonna rebuild Zion now that, and we're gonna free people from the Matrix and all this garbage," right? Which is kind of true, but at the same time, it's still just all part of the system of control. So yeah, that's absolutely one of my top favorite movies of all time is The Matrix as well. And it just gets very deep if you think about it, because, like I said, the one ends up becoming not their savior, but their enslaver that continues the system of control. Zion is part of the system of control. Zion was created by the machines. And once the one figures that out, he ends up going along with it because he thinks, okay, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is the destruction of the human species, and he doesn't want that. So he goes along with it. And it's a cycle that keeps going. And Neo breaks that cycle, right? So, because of the power of choice, I guess. And because of how he was manipulated by the Oracle, to love not just humanity as a whole, but one particular individual, which would be Trinity. Petter says right-hand path equals reunion with the divine. Left-hand path equals becoming the divine. Absolutely, yes. That's very great. That's a very good way of summarizing that. So Derek, if you're still listening, that's a great another way of putting it, is you seek to dissolve into an ecstatic state of union with the divine, kind of like a return to the womb in a sense, whereas in the left-hand path you seek to become a force of nature in your own right, in a sense. One way of putting it anyways. Tree Marie says hello. Hello, Tree Marie. Thank you for stopping in. I don't have a heck of a lot of time, just a few more minutes to go. But I'm glad that you managed to pop in. William Latin says, good movie. Yeah, I love that movie. It's, like I said, I thought a lot about it. I must have seen it. I can't even count how many times I've seen it. Probably like 30 times. 33 times I probably watched The Matrix. Behemoth X, hey brother. He says, hey brother, and I'm saying it back, hey brother. How's it out there in west of Toronto? Here in the east of Toronto, it's very very snowy, and I actually saw 3 car accidents on my way to work this morning. A couple people in the ditch and another person who'd smashed up their car. I'm lucky I managed to get the snow tires on before today. Matthew says, good insight on the Matrix movie. Thank you. Derek says, love that description. Great. Hail Satan says, I support Luciferian Research Society. I represent. Hail Satan says, absolutely the best network for Luciferian. I will donate for LRS. Cheers, brother. Thank you very much, Hail Satan. I really appreciate that. Behemoth X says, icy as fuck. LOL. Yeah, here too. I mean, we're not that far. We're not that far from each other. Nina the Mystic says, greetings from the West Coast. Thank you for popping in, Nina. I really appreciate everybody who came by for this esoteric AMA, Ask Me Anything. I was mostly esoteric rant about anything you happen to be thinking about at the time, but that's how my live streams always end up going. That's kind of the fun of it, I think, just seeing where the train of thought leads us. Stuck on the Web says, may you tell us since when and how did you get into esoteric interests, please? Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of time, but I can tell you that, as a kid, as a very young child, I learned to read when I was about 4 or 5, I think. My dad taught me how to read mainly. My mom as well a bit, but mainly my dad. I remember is what I remember. And one of my mom took me to a Catholic church one time because they wanted to put me in Catholic school and I wasn't baptized. And so they had to baptize me. And so we went to Mass first. Uh, and then we arranged to have a baptism, which I remember. And which somebody who was mentioned earlier in this video said something really funny during that baptism. Anyways, that's beyond the point. But that seeing that mass, and I was asking lots of questions. Like, it seemed like magic to me. The whole transubstantiation of the bread and wine into the flesh and blood of Christ. That seemed really, it really blew me away, and that got me interested in ceremonial magic. I'm sure of it, that had an imprint on me, and that got me into the whole, bell, book, and candle, the incense, all that stuff, the chanting, the singing, the altar, all that stuff. It got me into that, and I ended up reading the Bible because I was very young and I knew how to read, so I ended up reading the Bible because I wanted to know more about this stuff, and I started questioning it immediately because I started with the Old Testament, and the Old Testament God, if you haven't read it, seems very like more like a demon than what you would think of as God. Like, he commits genocide, he kills innocent babies for no reason really that I could determine. In Exodus, where he makes the Pharaoh's heart harden to the plight, and in punishment for saying, no, I will not free the slaves, which God made him say no, he kills all the firstborn babies of the Egyptian people, unless you had the blood, of the lamb on your doorstep, right, for Passover. And that kind of stuff, and that happens lots of times, that kind of thing where God just murders innocent babies or tells people to. And I'm like, what the hell am I reading here? As a little kid, I wasn't even in school yet. And that got me questioning. That got me thinking along Gnostic lines of thought, already as a very young child. And then my dad showed me how to read tea leaves, that form of divination. My grandmother used to play solitaire, and, I would go to the reservation, and she'd play solitaire, and sometimes if you sat down beside her while she was playing solitaire, she would start reading the playing cards as if she was doing a reading. And my dad had a lot of esoteric books in his personal library, and I would borrow them and read them. And eventually, when I became a teenager, I'm skipping over a ton of stuff. I felt a calling to the priesthood in Catholicism, but as I learned more about Catholicism, I realized that it wasn't for me. And I started, exploring various different alternate spiritual systems that were out there in the world, and that got me more into ancient ones as well, like mythology and all that. And I started experimenting, and that's what ended up getting me into, hardcore occult practice and study. Like, I think I was 17 when I bought my first tarot deck for myself, and I had been exposed to the images before, in particular the tarot card. So this brings us back full circle to the beginning of the video. But that first time I ever saw the image of the Tower card, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was in a book on my dad's bookshelf, and I was very, very young, and it was just a black and white image, but it just was so powerful to me. Like, it just was so impactful to me. Left an imprint for sure. And when I was 17 years old, I got hardcore into the study and practice of occultism, and I never looked back. I was still right hand path at that time, but you know, I ended up getting into, by the time I was 22, probably, or 23 at the latest, I was probably self-identifying as Luciferian by the time I was in my early 20s. So that's kind of a quick rundown. Petter says, I didn't like The Matrix until I got into lucid dreaming. And that's when I saw The Matrix for the very first time. I was at the theater with a friend of mine, Eugene. He was like, I think you're going to like this one. He hadn't seen it either, I don't think. And we went and saw it together. And the whole time I kept thinking, this is a lucid dream. You know, he's having a lucid dream. That's what this is, isn't it? Until I found out that it was, you know, a bit more literal in terms of that, anyways. Petter says, if you like The Matrix, I would recommend The Cell. Excellent movie. Excellent movie. Who's in that again? Jennifer Lopez, right? And the guy who plays Kingpin in that Marvel's Daredevil TV show. Can't remember his name at the moment, but he's an amazing actor. Quite the range on him. Quite the acting range. Hill Satan says, have you watched The Three from Hell, a film from Rob Zombie? No, I haven't. And unfortunately, I gotta cut this short. I've been on for almost an hour here, and I gotta pop off and go finish my shift. I got about an hour or so left to go before I get to go home. And hopefully the roads are a little better than they were when I came in today. But yeah, I'll get a bit of a rest after tonight. But yeah, thank you everybody for showing up. We got a lot of people here today on this live stream and a lot of interaction. I really appreciate the community that's building up around this channel. All the people that show up regularly to my live streams. I really appreciate all of you guys. Oh, Vincent D'Onofrio, William says. Yes, that's right. Such an amazing actor. Miss B says, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and being part of it. I really appreciate all of you. And until next time, everybody, stay lucid.